This video is made possible thanks to the support of patrons like Ben Hawkley and Solar Forest, who are my first new patrons this month. Thank you, folks. Hiya there, champ. How's it going? Oh, hello, physical manifestation of all my work anxieties. I'm having a swell time, actually. I'm just playing Amplitude Studios' new game, Humankind. Oh, I've heard about that. Any good? Yeah, it's a really fresh addition to the alt history 4X strategy game subgenre, and it's utterly gorgeous to boot. I mean, I guess I have a couple of mechanical issues with it, and I guess philosophical ones as well, but aside from that, I'm having a fantastic time. Why do you have a notebook? Oh, I'm just writing down a couple of your thoughts. Sounds like this would be a great topic for a video. Oh, thanks, but I don't really want to turn things I use to unwind from making content into content themselves. Hello, spicy people of the internet. Spice8Rack here, aka Petra Russia 420, and after playing a lot of Amplitude Studios' new game, Humankind, I've been left with a puzzling question. Just how well can a game portray the rise of human civilization from within a flawed genre? Who are you talking to? Sponsored by Manscaped.com. Jesus Christ. I've always liked civilization building games, and more specifically the Civilization franchise, which, if my memory serves, is maybe one of the earliest experiences I had with video games. It was that and Monkey Island. I sunk uncountable hours into Civ 4 on my family's computer. I very nearly ruined my A-levels whilst grinding out multiplayer matches on Civ 5, and when Civ 6 came out, I thought it was alright. Obviously, I appreciated the graphical upgrade, and I liked the stuff that they were doing with natural disasters, but for some reason, the game just didn't grab me as much as previous entries into the genre, and so I only spent a measly 100 hours playing it. I do love this series, but I've always found one of the foundational elements of these games to be kind of a bugbear. The very act of picking your civilization before the game starts up never felt Wait, hang on, you can play as fucking Mao in Civilization 4? What the fuck? The very act of picking a civilization and a leader before the game starts up was never historically truthful enough for me. This may seem like an utterly bizarre point of contention, especially in a game series most famous for a running gag where Mahatma Gandhi becomes a frothing mass murderer upon discovering democracy, but let me explain. When you boot up a new game of Civ, you'll be asked to pick one of several civilizations to play as. And yes, I am aware I am explaining this as if you have literally never played a game of Civ before, but my nan watches my videos and I'm pretty sure her computer still runs Windows Vista, so I'm trying to be accessible here. Once you've picked that civilization, you will pilot them from the dawn of recorded history right up until the modern day. You will discover writing as the undying visage of Mahatma Gandhi. You will circumnavigate the globe as the undying visage of Mahatma Gandhi. And you will launch your first nuclear weapon on another nation, committing one of the worst crimes against humanity imaginable, becoming Death, Destroyer of Worlds. As the undying visage of Mahatma Gandhi, as much as I loved and still do love Civ, there's something about this specific point that always took me out of the game. I can suspend my disbelief when I send my Japanese samurai to besiege the Iroquois nation because they built the pyramids before I did, in the same way that every game of EU4 I have ever played invariably devolves into me finding ways to invade England and liberate Cornwall. Provided you're not doing weird fascist shit, doing ridiculous ahistorical things in historical sandbox games is good and fun. But there was always something about starting and ending a game about human civilization as one continuous empire with one continuous leader that felt even too ahistorical for my belief to be sufficiently suspended. For a good few years, I couldn't really put a finger on why this was, why this specific part of the Civ series bothered me so much. That was until this year, when two things happened. The first was I got to grips with a little bit of philosophy, and the second was a game called Humankind came out. Humankind is a 4X strategy game. 4X stands for the 4 X's which make up the gameplay of these games. Exploring, expanding, exploiting, and ex-girlfriend left me because I logged more hours in CK3 than I did our relationship. In this game, you play through the whole of human civilization, from the Neolithic era to modern times and beyond, building cities, waging wars, researching technology, and chasing tiny fauna around with your mouse cursor. And I cannot stress enough how this last feature alone makes it better than every Civ game that's come before it combined. Obviously, there are a lot of similarities between the two games. Here's a picture of them side by side. You really don't need to be Columbo to work out that one's inspired by the other, but there are also a lot of differences between the two, and some of them are fantastic, like the far more interesting battle system that Humankind uses, which makes a phenomenal use of different levels of terrain, and some of the differences are not so good, like how Humankind's religion and faith system feels more like a tacked on afterthought than a mechanic with any real depth. Although, at least Humankind came with a faith system. Hey, Firaxis, what was the deal with having the Civ 5 base game not have religion? Yeah, Civ 5 came out 11 years ago. Yeah, I'm still mad about it. What? What are you gonna do? And what, mate? You wanna fucking come and have a go? Yeah, I can be angry at a decades-old video game. Eat my ass and wash my balls. But amongst these differences, one of the most fundamental ones is how Humankind approaches the question of your civilization itself. As I said before, in Civ, you pick your leader before you start. And well, I guess he's here as well. In Civ, you pick your Civ and then play through the whole of the game as that Civ. In Humankind, conversely, there are two major changes in this idea. Firstly, as you progress through different eras of the game, you're able to change your civilization's culture to a new one. Each new culture has a unique building, unit, and bonus which keeps your Civ feeling fresh as you progress through the game. It also changes up the aesthetic of your civilization. The houses in your cities change to reflect your new culture, as do your units. For example, Olmekian spearmen don't look the same as Hittite spearmen, despite being mechanically the same unit. It's a small touch, but a much appreciated one in comparison to the Civ series, which uses a library of generic units for every single civilization and then just alters the colorings on their shields. But not only do I prefer this mechanic in a mechanical sense, I also feel like this mechanic better captures how human societies change throughout real history. No empire lasts forever. Cultures grow to replace the old and dying. Nations fracture and borders shift. Countries and societies that exist today have not existed in perpetuity. I'd really recommend Tom Nicholas's video about how countries were invented for more on this idea. And I feel that this mechanic in Humankind reflects that idea a lot better than Civ does. I love how, for example, in Humankind, Egyptians appear twice as playable cultures, once in the ancient era and once in the contemporary, reflecting how these cultures have, whilst sharing the same name, become exponentially different to one another over the course of many thousands of years. Compare this to Civilization V's Egypt, who are, from the dawn of time to the age of space exploration, indefinitely obsessed with building wonders. I am Ramses II. I have lived for 9,000 years, and I will not rest until my great Egyptian empire has finally constructed Broadway. That was my Ramses II impression. And I wish I'd waited until the end of the recording session to do that, because I think that fucked my voice. But this isn't the only, or even most significant change in how these two games approach your civilization's cultural identity. In my opinion, the much more significant and interesting feature of Humankind's culture system has less to do with how you select your civilization's culture, but rather, when. However, before I get to that, I'd like to invite my Nan to pause the video and skip to this timecode. Done that, Nan? Fantastic. And now for a quick word from our sponsor. If there's one thing my friends, family, and many lovers ask me, it's what products do you use to keep your genitalia so tidy and fresh? And to them I say, I go to Manscaped.com, the global brand for men's grooming and hygiene. Thanks to Manscaped's 4th generation electric waterproof trimmer with advanced skin-safe TM technology, I felt more confident than ever to keep my testicles so bold and frictionless that you could throw me crotch first down a toboggan flume and set a new land speed record. And their Crop Reviver, a freshing aloe vera ball toner spray, sits forever in my coat pocket for when I need to impress a local tour guide or potential business contact with how toned my dick and balls are. And for a limited time only, you can receive all of this plus 2 free gifts. Simply head over to manscaped.com and get 20% off plus free international shipping when you use the code Spice8Rack at checkout. Manscaped.com. Their products maintain your groin real good. As I said before, in Civ you pick your civilization and then load into the map, tasked with shaping the world to best fit your predetermined bonuses. Greek players will seek out city-states to befriend, and Japanese players will settle on coastlines with resources to work. Humankind, inversely, starts all players in a generic Neolithic era, where you have to explore your starting location, gathering food and curiosities until you've got enough to advance towards the Ancient era. It may seem simple or even entirely inconsequential, but by just slightly delaying a player's choice as to what culture and thereby what gameplay bonuses that they want until after they've seen their immediate geography, Humankind puts the material before the conscious. Civilization system says that by choosing to play as the Huns, you're going to need to seek out horses in order to capitalize on your society's predetermined benefits when it comes to pastures. Inversely, when Humankind presents you with the option to become the Huns, you may only do so should the conditions that your civilization finds itself in make that a good choice. Don't have the need for an easily growable army or rapid expansion via outposts. You don't have to take on the characteristics of this culture. And this happens even as early as your very first culture. It wouldn't make much sense for the Zo, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, if it's Zhou or Zo. I will look that up actually, instead of just barreling ahead.
Zhou.
It wouldn't make much sense for the Zhou in Humankind to be selected by a player with no access to the horses and copper needed for their unique unit, and few mountains nearby for their unique district. And of course, this is the same regard in reality. No two early human populations from entirely different parts of the world with entirely different available resources and systems of organisation ever produced the exact same society and culture as one another. But this isn't to say that this system is perfect by any stretch. On a mechanical basis, some cultures are just wildly overpowered regardless of your standing in the game world. Yeah, I'm looking at you, the Turks, with your busted public schools that somehow produce plus 300% science. I mean, what's the public school system like in Turkey? The only thing of any note my comprehensive has produced was fucking Zoella. But outside of unbalanced gameplay, and also the fact that oftentimes games in Humankind can get kind of stale, seeing as that realistically within each era you're only going to be playing against one of 8 potential different cultures, there are some other issues. The fact that your culture does make dramatic aesthetic and mechanical changes between eras makes sense, although the domino style X leads to Y which leads to Z doesn't. What I mean by this is that In Humankind, each player picks one distinct culture per era, and then entirely shifts to a different culture in the next era. You can play in the classical era as the Celts, then entirely transform into the medieval English, for example. However, in real history, yes, the Celts eventually became the English, but so did the Romans, and Vikings, and French, and Saxons, and Moors, and
bloody beaker folk coming here with their beakers.
Doubtless dozens of other significant cultures who my public Zoella-themed education neglected to mention contributed to what came to be known as the English. And that's just considering the people who lived here before the Tudor Age. The fact that Humankind locks your civilization to a single track rather than a system which allows for the intermingling of culture, a thing that has defined mankind more so than any single culture itself, is a disappointment. Although, to be fair, A, I can't imagine how complicated such a system would be to build, and B, this is still far better than the system which civilization uses, where you experience 5,000 years of uninterrupted Sumerian society led by Gilgamesh the Shredded Terror Lich. However, as much as a historically accurate improvement this is over Civ, to build your society in response to the world, not the other way around, this is still a flawed representation of how society and culture develops. In the last 3,000 or so years, at least 4 different social systems have successively superseded themselves in, say, the UK. Proto-communism gave way to classical slave society, which became feudalism and then capitalism. Yet, during all this time, the geographical conditions in the UK have changed so little that it would be impossible to claim that these changes occurred simply in response to the natural world. Equally, the geography of America, for example, is changing at a very rapid pace with increasing floods, droughts, forest fires, hurricanes, and other terrible royals of the natural world, and yet that hasn't naturally led to a change in the economic system, which has been the cause of the majority of these ills. So, why do societies develop and change? Well, looking at the mechanics of Civ and Humankind, these games seem to be saying that it is population size which is the determining factor. The more people in your cities, the more people you have working as researchers, the more science you generate each turn, the faster you unlock new technologies, the more food you can produce.
The bigger the figure, the better I like her, the better I like her, the better I feed her, the better I feed her, the bigger the figure, the bigger the figure, the more I gonna love.
This isn't fully incorrect either. Population size and density certainly have an impact on a society's development, but it's certainly not the determining factor. After all, the population of the United States has always been smaller than that of China, yet the latter is still considered a developing country, albeit one that is now rapidly developing. Similarly, the population density of a country like the UK is much greater than that of China, yet this society has yet to develop past the point of being an island of big babies who still need a royal family to feel special and important. What about development through great people, like the great scientists, engineers and artists in Civ that can speed your civilization into new technologies and social civics? Again, certainly individual people have left huge impacts on art, science and even the geography of the world, but to say that individuals are the determining factor of development is also incorrect. In a series of lectures in the late 19th century, the Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle remarked,
"In all epochs of the world's history we shall find the great man to have been the indispensable saviour of his epoch, the lightning without which the fuel never would have burnt. The history of the world, I said already, was the biography of great men."
But this of course ignores the fact that many great people's contributions to society go unrecognised or actively shunned in their time and beyond, either because their artistic styles do not conform with the culture of that day, or because their greatness is stunted by external factors which their society imposes upon them, as the sociologist Herbert Spencer, a contemporary of Carlyle, wrote.
You must admit that the genesis of a great man depends on the long series of complex influences which has produced the race in which he appears and the social state into which that race has slowly grown. Before he can remake his society must make him.
Of course, all of these aspects of society, great people, population, the world in which the society finds itself in, these are contributing factors to any society's development. But for us to get to grips with what the actual determining factor of the development of society is, we have to talk about historical materialism. Yeah, that's right, dork. You thought this was just going to be a meandering critique of a video game subgenre. Psych, loser! This was all a cover for me to talk about dialectics. I punked you good! Historical materialism is a philosophy which holds that, amongst other things, the chief force that determines the development and character of human society is the forces of production of that society. Humans need to produce and distribute the necessities of existence, otherwise no work gets done because everybody is far too busy being naked and dead. The means by which they do that in a society becomes the mode of production. Every mode of production inherently contains internal contradictions and conflicts, the resolution of which becomes the basis by which they, and society at large, can develop. Say an early human society required more food to sustain their settlement. They thus resolve the contradiction between their increasing need for food and lack of it by expanding the land they need to grow crops. But this presents a new contradiction, that between the society's want to have all of the grown food and the desires of now closer wildlife to eat from the expanded farms. The resolution of this contradiction brings with it new contradictions, new polar and opposing forces which are in turn resolved, all the while the how of production develops. The mode of production and the changes therein cause changes in the social systems, ideas, culture and political views of the society that surrounds them. The feudal mode of production was of the serfs' production for the benefit of their local lord, and the ideas of feudal society reflected and reinforced this hierarchy. Here is a picture of a dog wearing sunglasses. It doesn't have anything to do with what I'm saying, but I found it impossible to break up the dryness of the section, so here is a picture of a dog with sunglasses. Okay, enjoy the picture of the dog with sunglasses. We're going back to the boring stuff now. As the how of production develops, however, it comes into greater and growing conflict with the who of production. The method by which things are produced comes into conflict with the relations of who does the producing, who organises production, how people are made to produce, what counts as property, and who owns it, etc. This is the principal contradiction within production. Of course, there will be times where a more pressing contradiction overrules this, such as in the case of an invasion or a war. Within our contemporary global and interconnected society, for example, the principal contradiction for many nations is found within their struggle for independence from imperialist nations. Be that found in how the World Bank requires countries suffering from war, disaster, or the direct effects of Western imperialism to liberalise their economies in exchange for needed loans, or be it more directly in how countries like America and the UK sanction, embargo, invade or support coups in nations whose economic interests diverge from their own. Indeed, the development and prosperity of countries like America and trading blocs like the EU came as a direct result of the purposeful underdevelopment or overexploitation of countries in the global south. I would highly encourage viewers to pick up a copy of The Wretched of the Earth, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and Neocolonialism, the Highest Stage of Imperialism. A free version of the latter can be found linked below. As time goes on, the relations within production, which once allowed the new mode of production to prevail over a previous one, become more and more a limiting factor on the productive forces. At which point, society enters into a period of social revolution, where the entire economic basis of society is more or less rapidly transformed. These rapid transformations occur as the contradictions within production come to an unresolvable head, where either the oppressed class overthrows the oppressing class, usually through some kind of force or at least the threat of such force, or both classes fall into ruin as society entirely breaks down. The former characterises the transition from feudalism to capitalism in Europe, the latter characterises the transition from the classical or slave society to feudalism after the fall of the Roman Empire. Or during the fall of the Roman Empire. Honestly, my history around that time is a little bit fuzzy. It's called the fucking Dark Ages, what do you expect? Halim Alra has a phenomenal video on historical materialism if you're interested in getting to grips with it a little bit more. And there are links in the description of this video to a bunch of free resources that explore both historical materialism and dialectical materialism, on which it is based. It's this process which propels society onward, and it's a process that, whilst almost certainly deeply difficult to program and convey, is lacking from almost every historical strategy game I've played. EU4, whose final section is all about the revolutions that cemented the domination of bourgeois democracy in Europe, is the closest I've found to a historical game presenting why revolutions happen. The final sections of EU4 take place around the time where bourgeois revolutions were finally overthrowing feudalism in Europe. As such, countries with high development that had embraced industrialisation and which are absolutist monarchies are far more likely in this section of the game to become the centre of the revolution compared to countries that don't fit those criteria. A mechanical reflection of a highly developed mode of production coming into conflict with its current restrictive relations of production. It makes a lot of sense for a company called Paradox, a company that makes a lot of games about society developing, to understand that societies develop because of the internal paradoxes within modes of production. It sounded smarter in my head, and the more I said it, the more it felt like I was talking out of my arse. However, even this system has flaws, such as a massive negative modifier added to non-European countries that otherwise would meet the criteria for becoming the centre of the revolution. Like, I get that it's called Europa Universalis 4, but it seems wildly arbitrary to say that it doesn't matter if the Incan Empire in your game pushed back the European powers and became one of the most developed nations of the 17th century, Portugal is just inherently predisposed to revolutionary activity because that's nearby where the revolutions happened. Even if you do a Paradox mega campaign playing from Imperator Rome through Crusader Kings and up until EU4, your game will still have this negative modifier for any non-European country, regardless of how history changed previous to this game. I don't know, I think it would just be nice if alt history games were a little bit more creative than throwing a dart at Europe to decide which country gets to kick historical events off. I realise that I'm doing a lot of bashing right now, but I do love historical strategy games, and 4X games within that. They are a lot of fun. I could watch the entire extended Lord of the Rings trilogy 40 times in a row without sleeping, and I still would have spent more time playing EU4 and Civ 5. But their very nature as a top-down game where civilization is guided down a set path by an eternal and external director is very much a fetter on any attempt to accurately represent historical development. For all of the improvements Humankind makes to the Civ formula, there are a number of trappings it retains. The technology tree pushes every Civ down the same historical track, implying that ideas like imperial power are as much a prerequisite for societal development as fishing or trade expeditions. Hello, slight amendment, slight bit of self-criticism here. What I just said is not entirely accurate. Something I noticed around 24 hours before I was planning on having this video out is that imperial power as a technology is not actually necessary if you want to reach the end of the technology tree. It does shut off part of the technology tree, but not all of it. It shuts off, I think, 18 out of the 40 or so technologies that follow after this sort of era. So it is entirely possible for you to play a game of Humankind whilst not developing the technology of imperial power. It's not a perfect system, of course. For example, it doesn't really make much sense that by not researching imperial power or one of the technologies that follow it, like feudalism, you wouldn't eventually be able to develop flintlock weaponry. But within this game, if you don't develop imperial power, you can never develop flintlock weaponry. You can never research that technology. Also, just because you don't research this technology, you can still very much act in an imperialist capacity. You just technically don't have the bit of paper that says I understand what I'm doing is this particular form of conquest. So not a perfect system, but it does show a level of understanding that not all societies went down the same technological or even social development path. As Walter Rodney points out in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, the sequence of modes of production noted in Europe were not reproduced in Africa. In Africa, after the communal stage, there was no epoch of slavery arising out of internal evolution, nor was there a mode of production which was the replica of European feudalism. In Africa, there is no doubt that the societies which eventually reached feudalism were extremely few. So there we go. A little bit of self-criticism, and also you can tell that I actually do enjoy playing Humankind. All of the criticism I have for this game, all of it, it's still a fun game because I'm playing it even after doing a bunch of reviewing and analysing, and I'm playing this in my own time right now. So anyway, back to the old video-a-rooney. God, I suck. Equally, an entirely landlocked settlement may still develop sailing, despite having no material basis for such technology. You can be at peace your entire playthrough and still develop naval artillery. Combine the two and you have a society of hilltop-dwelling pacifists who inexplicably know how to build nuclear submarines. Additionally, there are many playable cultures in 4X games whose real-life members have spoken out against being included in such games. Civilization 6's inclusion of Poundmaker and the Cree as a playable civilization was one such that became a source of controversy. As head man for the Cree nation, Milton Tutusis said upon Poundmaker's reveal, "When I first saw the video game, I thought, that's pretty cool. Poundmaker is in a game. But when I looked further into the matter, it raised some questions. This game continues to promote some of these ideologies that are connected to concepts of colonialism and imperialism and that doctrine of discovery, which are totally contrary to the beliefs and values of Chief Poundmaker and many other indigenous leaders around the world for that matter. Indeed, alt history 4X games by their nature are entirely inappropriate vehicles to present and explore indigenous and non-colonial society. Though the societies that existed in what we now know as North America, Latin America, Australia, New Zealand and elsewhere certainly too adhered to the materialist development of history, their particular development found little similarity to the imperialist character of European expansion, on which the expansion of these games is often based. To put the Haudenosaunee as a playable culture in a game where success is determined by which player is best at exploration, expansion, exploitation, and extermination, an acronym that could very easily be seen as the slogan for colonialism, is, to slip out of my academic voice for a moment, broke as fuck, my guy. On the topic of broke as fuck inclusions, Humankind comes with a rather unpleasant feature of an enableable new world. It is on by default and will generate a quote-unquote distant, uninhabited continent. Which brings me to a fun segment of the video I would like to call The New World Wasn't Uninhabited, you fucking settlers! The idea that America, for example, was a wild west of as yet untamed wilderness is a myth that obfuscates both the people and societies that populated the continent, as well as the genocidal atrocities that were committed by European settlers in order to make the land uninhabited. To quote just a bit of Jay Sakai's phenomenal book Settlers, America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived in Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretched from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in central Mexico, with an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and Southern America. Indeed, the sugar-coating of or outright lying about settler colonial projects is a rampant feature in 4X games like EU4. It gives you the option of either eradicating the native population of whatever province you seek to build a colony on, or peacefully coexisting with said population. Of course, either way, once your colony has been built, the native population who did live there is entirely replaced by your country's culture. Presumably your kind, ethical, settler state with a human face just spent a few years peacefully asking the local indigenous people to move elsewhere, and everybody involved agreed, and it was entirely possible for the United States to be formed and maintained peacefully. He said with dripping sarcasm. Now, I'm not saying that someone playing as a colonial power in EU4, or settling a city on a stretch of empty islands in Civ, or claiming the somehow predetermined borders of unoccupied territory in Humankind is being indoctrinated into believing that countries like Australia and Canada aren't built on land stolen through genocides that are continuing to this day. What I am saying is that public education often already waters down, if not entirely excludes, that reality already. And with games like Civ being used as teaching tools in classrooms, the continued watering down or even glorification for the sake of making a fun gameplay mechanic is, at worst, active genocide denial being introduced into classrooms, and at best, it's still wildly disrespectful. It's all well and good when Paradox has lead developers come out and say that they don't want to give quote-unquote these people fuel for the fire, these people meaning the neo-Nazis who like using alt history games as a digital fascist sandpit. But the very nature of 4X historical games encourage and gamify imperialism and genocide. Also, really quick, holy shit, why did anybody let teachers use the nuclear Gandhi joke game as a historical educational tool? Like, I know that public education under bourgeois democracy is in a bit of a dire strait, but let's rein the ridiculousness in a little bit here, people. Although, that being said, I was surprised that the Civilopedia entry for class struggle didn't entirely read like an Orwell novel as recited from memory by Tucker Carlson, so low bar, but nice to see it cleared. This isn't to say that all alt history games have inherently whack things to say about history. Like, the idea of hard borders as something that have to be invented in a game like Civ is a pleasant foil to the idea that borders are somehow sacred and everlasting aspects of humanity, something that had been the case in previous entries in the franchise. And these kinds of games are fun. I was introduced to EU4 in lockdown, and again spent most of 2020 invading Britain and liberating Cornwall as various countries from around the world. Humankind is a fun game. It introduces some interesting mechanics into the alt history 4X genre, and there's more I could talk about. I like how fame is the principal win condition of the game, a nebulous, almost meaningless concept, not only implying that the very idea of winning a game about the development of humanity is inherently kind of silly, but I now have a but there. I wrote not only at the start of that sentence, and then it ends in a full stop. Why don't I proof anything I read before I sit down in front of a microphone? You can also chase deer and horses around with your cursor in this game, which again, cannot stress enough how much of an improvement this is over every other 4X game that's come out before it. But Humankind is also a very flawed game, both in a mechanical capacity, like how in my first full playthrough I was generating so much science that I'd managed to develop nuclear fission in the 13th century, and how turning on auto-explore for your units in the Neolithic era will essentially allow them to wall hack to all the best resources. But it's also flawed by the virtue of the mechanics and gameplay its subgenre engenders. When Humankind was first announced, I was hoping for a game that truly centred humankind, took the people, so often visible only as productive forces and a happiness ticker, and put their well-being front and centre of your society's development over time, asked what it meant to actually exist in your society. The civic system and narrative events go some way to make you engage with the social character of your society, as well as the human cost of how your society functions, but they both fall flat. Each time I play Humankind, I largely experience the same narrative events, making each society I try and produce feel largely the same. And the civic system has a whole host of issues. Most of the civics you choose from provide passive effects, causing the whole civic system to mostly exist in the background of both your game and your mind. Wildly changing things like your society's property rights or system of government only requires you to have enough purple star points to do so, and changing a civic as drastic as, for example, banning the practice of your millennia-old system of faith, then produces no kind of unrest or protest from within your society. But for all of the individual triumphs and shortcomings of Humankind, the structure, gameplay, and win conditions of 4X games will forever be a limit on how history can be explored in video games. And it's a shame that the majority of games about building human society find themselves in a genre where the size of your border matters more than what kind of society exists within them, if that society even has borders at all. I'm not saying that we need to cancel 4X games, at least not until I've liberated the Isle of Man as the newly reformed Mongol Empire. I just hope that people engage with alt history games in a more critical capacity. To ask whether victory in a game where victory can only be achieved through exploitation and conquest is really worth it. And that's Humankind. It's a cool game which improves upon a lot of the systems popularised by the Civilization franchise, except for Faith, which, like, what's the point of even having a faith mechanic if I can't name my religion my butt cheeks and spread them across the world? But there is only so much good that can come from improving on a system that limits any ability to represent, explore, and play with history in any way other than through expansion, war, and imperialism. A great number of studies point out how the co-option of non-colonial societies like the Cree or Zulu into imperialism reinforce a Western-centric view of the world, while silencing the actual histories of those societies. Presenting human society as a competition where there must be an eventual winner at the end is not only ahistorical, unless your name is Francis Fukuyama, but also deeply disappointing for a game titled Humankind. Simplifying human development into a single universal track, not exploring the potentiality of a successful overthrow of the ruling class of slave society, ushering in a different mode of production to feudalism, or asking what would have happened had the bourgeois revolutions failed to usher in capitalism. These are compelling and entirely unexplored ideas within alt history, and demonstrates both a shallow understanding of how humanity developed, as well as a lack of imagination as to the potential of alt history games. Why must all games of these genres reduce alt history down to territories changing hands with different empires? There are better ways of exploring humankind than the way Humankind has chosen, and I cannot wait to see those games when they come. I will enjoy playing Humankind, up until the game I hoped Humankind would be comes out. Also, that was the second time in a row that I've wryly referenced The End of History and The Last Man in an unrelated video, so I think it's about time for me to stop. Shooting on a different day for the credits, and my hair has completely deflated. A massive thank you to both John Duncan and Halim Alra for providing their voices for this video and also giving it a once over before I put it out into the world. Please go check out their channels, their socials, all of that good stuff is linked down below. They're proper good video makers. They are. I don't script these bits, can you tell? And of course, a massive thank you to all of my wonderful patrons, without whom I would not be able to be making these videos as semi-regularly as I do. So thank you so much for that. And if you fancy joining the names currently on screen, or the ones I'm about to read out, then consider heading over to patreon.com/Spice8Rack. And a massive special thank you to all of my $10 patrons, who include 1234, I declare a class war. 7th guest, a fool of 5 colours, a gay American couple, a socialist hobgoblin, Akumi the Reaper, Adam Gable, AJ Ingram, Alex Berman, Alex Flynn, Alice Perales, Alison Steele, an alt-right sleeper agent who gives money to communist Idika, and then in parentheses probably tilts persona close parentheses, an Umbreon pastry, Atticus von Schwoll, or Abraxas Siberia? Maybe, is that how it's pronounced? Bacterium, Bambi Ward, Basu Gasu Baku Hatsu Baku Matsu, Ben Pike, Biscuit Blade, Bradley Rose, Brian Dunn, Cab, Kalulu, Chase Beard, Chris DeVos, Surso Ceresa, Cloud Chaser Kestrel, Cognitive Glitch, Conflicted Psyches, Deadpan Goth, Drew Pierce, Duncan, Dystopico, Exidian, Eldritch Changeling, Alfonsi, Erica Valentine, Erin, Ethan Abraham, Everybody Loves Robots, It's True, Faxel, Felix Mortem, Fiona Perry, Fiona, Fofu, Future Beagle, Grey Days, Hand It Over That Thing Your Dog Pictures, Handsome Phil, Hope Wilkes, Hypercube MTG. I am saying this only because our global economic system does not intrinsically support artistic expression. I want Emrakul to dominate me. In response, I bolt myself. In response, table flip. Oh, there's lore now. There's lore in my credits. Jake Colburn, Jessica Settle, Joe Benson, Johnny Rifle, Joshua M. Steffen, Julius Home, Just Mild Lilac is finally going back to university this year and loving it. Good on you. Good on you, Mild. Mild? Lilac. Oh, good on you. Whichever single part of that name you prefer as a minor moniker. Carlia Whithart, Caitlin Evers, Kate B, Koo Zombie, Kurdape Apologizer, Leliana, Lily of the North Star, Literally a Ghost That Pushes Over Candles, Linnea, Madame Monroe, Magic Arcanum, Matthew Marquise, I hope that's how I'm pronouncing it, Matthew Short, Max Cooper, Mike Mavramatis, Mr. Skolaton, N. Ben, Okami, Omar Altibaihi, Oops Ulsaini, Pappy Markov was a mistake, Peter Carter, Phoenix Swans, Buck, Riddle of Lightning, Romeo Joe, Singularity, but the first I is a 1, Samuel Kona, Several Goblins in a Trenchcoat, Sir Shaunsey, Sky Johnson, Squimbus, Swan Hunter, Synthetic Evil 13, Tana Matone, or Tana Matone, whichever one you prefer, whichever one is how it's actually pronounced, Taylor Street, Ted Cruz, The Ghost of Karl Marx in 4D, The Hermit Crab Goddess, The Jelly Bean Warlock, Thelon, The Reaper of You, Totally a Spy, also known as Bastard, Travis K, Trey Ernst, Trey Parker, Untap Upkeep Lose, Venza, Vladimir Gorvikov, Wesley, That Plotting Communist. What do Sun Quan and Captain of Boat for Centaurs have in common? Horsemanship. Horsemanship. Okay, preferred the Domri Raid one, but you know what? Can't all be winners. Wicked Haiku, that's so mean. Wicked Haiku, Xenon, yeah, go on, call me a wiener, I'm still strutting harder than your front suspension. What does that mean? And Xanoron. And thank you to all of my other lovely patrons. That was the wildest Patreon credits reading I've had in a bit. And yeah, hope you have a lovely old day. And as always, stay spicy.